Okay, now that we know how to factor, we are going to talk about how to solve polynomial equations. There are many ways to solve polynomial equations, but one of the more important ways is to factor. And so the only polynomials we will talk about in this video will be polynomials that can be factored. Right, so to solve polynomial equations, the first thing you do is you move all the terms to one side of the equal sign and you have 0 on the other side. Then you factor the polynomial and then you set each factor equal to 0. Alright, so let's begin, and the first polynomial that we're going to use is 3x times x minus 4 equals 0. Now you'll notice that this polynomial already has all of its terms moved to one side of the equal sign and 0 on the other. So step 1 is complete. It is also already factored, so we don't have to factor it. The only thing we have to do is set each factor equal to 0. Why do we do that? Well, the multiplicative property of 0 says that if you have a times b times c times anything, if you have a product that's equal to 0, then in order for that to be true, one of your factors has to be 0. In other words, in order to get 0 for an answer when I multiply, either a has to be 0, or b has to be 0, or c has to be 0. So we're using the multiplicative property of 0 to solve our polynomial equations. All right, well in this case, 3x is a factor, so 3x can be 0 and this equation will be true. Well now if 3x is 0, then let's divide by 3. And 0 divided by 3 is just 0, so x equals 0. So if x is 0, then this equation is true. Well, another factor in this equation is x minus 4. So I set x minus 4 equal to 0. You set each factor equal to 0. If x minus 4 equals 0, add 4 to both sides, and I get x equals 4. So when x is 4, this equation is also true. So you notice with polynomial equations, we get more than one answer. All right, let's do another one. Let's do 4x squared minus 20x plus 25 equals 0. Now in this polynomial, notice again that all of the terms are already on one side of the equal sign and 0 is on the other side. Right? But it is not factored, so I'm going to have to factor the polynomial. Now it doesn't have anything, there are no terms in common I can factor out. And if there was a number term that was in common, when I factored it out, I really could just divide both sides by that number and get rid of it. But I can't take out a greatest common factor, so now I just identify it. It's a trinomial. And it looks like it could be a perfect square trinomial. 4x squared is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square. So let's see if the middle term cooperates. Well, the middle term has to be 2 times the square root of the first term, which is 2x, times the square root of the last term, which is 5. 2 times 2x times 5 does in fact equal 20x. So this is a perfect square trinomial. When we factor a perfect square trinomial, remember that we get two factors that look just alike. All right, I'm going to write them out this time. And the first term in each factor is the square root of the first term here, and the last term is the square root of the last term. And then both of them get the sign of the middle term. So they both have a minus sign in here. Equals 0. Now, I have factored the polynomial, so I set each factor equal to 0. Well, in this case, both factors are the same, so I really only have to set one factor equal to 0. So 2x minus 5 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides, and I get 2x equals 5. I divide both sides by 2, and I get x equals 5/2. So with this polynomial equation, I only get one answer. That does happen sometimes. All right, let's do another one. All right, 2x squared equals 9x minus 10. Now, this trinomial is, I notice that it's a quadratic, it's a polynomial to the second degree, all right? But, so it's a polynomial equation, I'm going to solve it, but all of the terms are not on one side of the equal sign, so I have to move them. Well, I'm going to move the 9x and the negative 10 to be over here with the 2x squared. So I'll subtract the 9x from both sides, and I get 2x squared minus 9x equals negative 10. And then I add 10 to both sides. and I get 2x squared minus 9x plus 10 equals 0. All right, now my polynomial is set up to solve. I need to factor my polynomial. I can't take out a greatest common factor. It is a trinomial. The leading coefficient is not 1. These are not perfect squares, so it is not a perfect square trinomial, so it's just a generic trinomial. Remember to factor these. We look for two numbers, 2 times 10, that multiply to give me 20 and add to give me negative 9. Well, the two numbers that come to mind are 4 and 5. They're going to have to be negative since 9 is negative. So I'm going to rewrite this trinomial as 2x squared minus 4x minus 5x plus 10 equals 0. Now it is written in 4 terms, and I can factor by grouping. So I'll group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms together. In the first 2 terms, I can take out a 2x, and I have x minus 2. The last 2 terms, I could take out either a plus 5 or a minus 5. So let's take out a plus 5 and see what happens. All right, when I take out a plus 5, I have minus x and then plus 2. Well, these two factors do not look exactly alike, but I do notice that they're additive inverses. Each term of one is the negative of each term in the other. So I'm going to take this one and factor a negative sign out and put it over here and rewrite it so that it looks just like this one. So I have 2x times x minus 2 minus 5 times x minus 2 equals 0. Now both terms are exactly alike, and I can proceed to factor. So I'm going to factor out the x minus 2. I'll have 2x minus 5 left equals 0. Now I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0. I add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. So there's one answer. And then 2x minus 5 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides. I get 2x equals 5. I divide by 2, and I get x equals 5 halves. So these are my two answers to this polynomial equation. Now let's do one more. We'll just put it up here. 1/2 x squared equals 1/3 x. So here's a polynomial equation. I need to solve it. But before I get started, I notice that there are some fractions. When we're just factoring polynomials and we don't have an equation, we have to work with the fractions. But anytime you have fractions in an equation, you can multiply by the least common denominator and get rid of your fractions. And it is always advisable to do so. So I'm going to multiply by 6 because that will get rid of the 2 and the 3. So if I multiply 1/2 x squared times 6, I get 3x squared. And if I multiply 1/3 x times 6, I get 2x. All right, now I'm ready to start solving my polynomial equation. So I'm going to move all terms to one side, which means I'm going to subtract the 2x from both sides. And then I have 3x squared minus 2x equals 0. Now I'm ready to factor my polynomial. Well, both of these have an x in common, so I take that out. X times 3x minus 2 equals 0. Now, I look at my remaining polynomial. It's a binomial. Can it be factored? Well, it is not a difference of 2 squares, so it cannot be factored. So I am done. Now I'm ready to set each factor equal to 0. So I set x equal to 0, and I set 3x minus 2 equal to 0. I add 2 to both sides, and I get 3x equals 2, and then I divide both sides by 3, and I get x equals 2/3. So there are my two answers for this polynomial equation. Now one more quick one. And this one will not look like a polynomial equation at all. All right. It is x times x minus 5 equals 3x minus 7. It's just an equation. I'm trying to solve for x. The first thing I'm going to do is use my distributive property to get rid of my parentheses. So we have x squared minus 5x equals 3x minus 7. Now I can see that it's a polynomial equation. Since it's a polynomial equation, I'm going to follow these steps to solve it. And I'm going to move all of my terms to this side over here. So I'll subtract the 3x from both sides. And I get x squared minus 8x equals negative 7. And then I'm going to add 7 to both sides. So I get x squared minus 8x plus 7 equals 0. Now I'm ready to factor my polynomial. Well, this is a trinomial whose leading coefficient is 1, so it should be very simple to factor. Remember that both factors are going to contain an x because that's the square root of the first term. And then both factors are going to have the numbers that multiply to give me 7 and add to give me negative 8. Well, the only factors of 7 are 7 and 1. So these will have to be 7 and 1, and since the 8 is negative, this will be negative 7 and this will be negative 1. Now it is factored, I'm ready to set each factor equals to 0. So x minus 7 equals 0. I add 7 to both sides, and I get x equals 7. And then x minus 1 equals 0. I add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 1. And there are my two answers to this polynomial equation.